All right, we're back. We are COMP1073, and I need to close the door. I'll be right back.
I got it. Sorry about that.
Yes, we're in the winter 2017 semester, week 13, part 1 of our broadcast. We're talking about CreateJS again, part 2 of what we talked about last week kind of thing. And I'm also going to do a bit of an exam review today because next week, during this time frame, there will be an exam. It will be practical. Will it take you the whole 3 hours? It should not. Absolutely not, actually, is the answer, right? If you've done your final assignment, which I've given you, then you should have no issues with the exam whatsoever, right? If you haven't done your last assignment, or if you haven't started, if you're planning not to do it somehow, then you'll have lots of trouble with the exam, right? So please do your final assignment. I think that'll be the culmination of everything that we've done here together. All right, so let's talk about CreateJS a little bit. Now, I'm working with a file that we worked with last time. So again, in my folders, just like we've done before, I'm going with lesson 12. I'm just going to duplicate it and create lesson 13. Not much changed here, okay? And I'm going to pull it into Visual Studio Code. Give me a second, and I'll put it up on GitHub. And if you want to follow along after that, you're sure to. You're welcome to do that. Oh, nice new version of the update from VS Code, which looks like it just got released. Some kind of bug fix or patch, which is happening regularly. Things I need to change. I definitely should change my readme.md file, which has lesson 12. I should say lesson 13. And it's like CreateJS using TypeScript, and we'll say continued. That's what we're really doing here today. Power.json definitely should say lesson 13, just to keep that on the lesson, on the same thing as we have. Everything else should remain the same. And we'll talk about this again. So I'm just going to upload this the way it is up to GitHub. Oh, nice. They've made some nice changes. I do need to change a couple of things. I have a new repository that I need to make, right? So just like I've done in the past, when I save my files, I'm going to remove my Git altogether. So I'm going to kind of go into my terminal. If you're a Mac user, like we said before, the way to do that is to do rm, so remove -rf .git. If you're a Windows user, right-click on the .git folder. You have to have the ability for you to see files and folders in Windows, and then you should be fine. And now I'm going to just do a git init, git add dot, git commit, -m initial commit. Hey, question for you. Do you think that Git will be on the exam? Think you'll have to actually do a Git repository? Anybody? Absolutely, the answer is. That's the answer. Absolutely. We've been doing Git. I've been killing you with Git all semester, right? So if you don't know how to do Git for the exam, you're going to lose 4 marks for that. Will it be live? How about that way? Should the exam be live? Do you think that I'm going to get you to put it up somewhere live on a site somewhere? Chances are it's going to be live. So those 2 things, you need to know how to put it up live, because we've been talking about how to get things live. So on some server, choose server of your choice, whatever it's going to be, whether it's on Azure, whether it's a Dream host, somewhere else, it's got to be live. So for the exam, you got to make sure that you know how to do that. Okay. Okay, so we've got this going. I've got my Git repository. I need to make a Git repository up online. And of course, just like normal, I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to go to Georgian. And from there, I'm going to add a new repository space. So we're going to go comp 1073, and it's winter 2017, lesson 13. I can't believe it. It's the end, right? Next week, and that's it, right? Now that I have my remote information is here, and of course, I'm just going to grab these last 2 lines here because that makes it easy for us. And paste and enter, always allow. There we go. And then if everything goes well, you should have it. So please, I'm going to put this up on Slack. If you look up this link here, I've been working with this one. So here's Slack. And so I'm going to just put that in there. So that's the new repo for today. And you can find that on slide. Okay. Cool. So we've got that going. So please, if you want to follow along with me, this would be a good time to do so because, like I said, we've kind of created this from scratch, and we're moving from there. All right, so what did we do last week? Let's just do a bit of a review of what we did with CreateJS. What is CreateJS? You know, if you're going to put it in words, what's CreateJS? Just, you know, your own words. What would you say? Anybody else? If you can't think about it, think about what it is, right?
Collection of libraries.
Collection of libraries. I like that. It's a collection of libraries. What else? What's CreateJS?
I would say collection of libraries.
Yeah. What else? What kind of libraries are they?
Like to make motion, to make sound.
To make motion and sound. What are they written in? JavaScript, right? We're talking about JavaScript in this course, so they're JavaScript libraries, right? They're not written in TypeScript. We're using TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, to help us as a helper, language. It's a new language from Microsoft, right? It's part of the whole JavaScript suite nowadays, because when we do JavaScript plain, like plain old JavaScript so far, that's what we've done. We use TypeScript as an enhancer, some way of making JavaScript a little easier, right? Because it helps us structure JavaScript in the way that we can do almost the same use the same object-oriented structure that we might learn in C# or Java or other languages that are more structured than JavaScript, right? And also it bridges the gap, that's what TypeScript does, between ECMAScript 5, which is the old version of JavaScript, and ECMAScript 6, or 2015, which is the newer version of JavaScript. And of course, we also have ECMAScript 2016, which is last year's version, which is ECMAScript 7, which really hasn't taken hold too much, right? So they keep on moving forward. The technology keeps rolling forward, and we need to use these helper applications and languages to move us forward as well. We use Bower to install our libraries like normal. So we use, Bower to get Tween.js, Easel.js, Sound.js, and Preload. Question: Do you think that I would make you do a Bower install next week? No, right? Why would I do that? I would probably give you the folders, and then all you do is Bower install. I wouldn't get you to go Bower install Tween.js, Bower install Easel.js, Bower. I wouldn't do that. That's a waste of time, right? That would take a lot more time than you have, and that's not what we're testing. I'm not testing you to see, can you install things with Bower? You should know how to do that by now. So that's not going to be there. You'll probably get some kind of starter that looks like this, right? Sure, update now. And then once you get your little starter code, then you build on it. That's what you're going to do. Okay. Yes, I saw. Thank you very much for that update. On the left, you can see that Visual Studio Code is definitely updated. Looks like they've done some minor cosmetic changes for different reasons, but that's fine. So in my index.html, notice what we did, just as a review. We need to have some kind of container to house our canvas. And we're using the canvas HTML element, right? The HTML canvas element. And the canvas element is just think about it as a dry erase board, all right? And that dry erase board, we can draw to it and erase it, and we're going to do that every frame. So 60 times a second, so once every 16.666 milliseconds, or whatever it is, we're going to just refresh or redraw that the canvas over and over again. That's going to give us the ability for us to do things like motion, some kind of animation or motion graphics more than anything else. Okay, well, I'm not going to call it animation. Animation is kind of a heavier word. I would just say we're moving things around on the screen. That's what we're doing. Okay. Notice that inside of the index.html file, we have to include all of the libraries, right, that are part of the CreateJS suite, right? So I've done them in a specific order. Easel, Tween. Oh, this is wrong. Look at this error. Easel, Tween. That's wrong. It should be Easel, Tween, Sound, right? So let me fix that part. And I wouldn't have got that unless I actually did this. So it's Sound.js, and this would be Sound.js. To test this, or to see this, right, in action, Sound.js, it's under scripts, right? So if I go to, that's weird, scripts, lib, Sound.js, right? And then under that, it'll be lib, and then it'll be Sound.js-0.6.2.min.js. Could you use the CDN for this one? You could. There are content delivery network options for this instead of using these local files. But for local testing, I like to use the libraries locally. Okay, cool. We've also, last week, we also talked about to create a class, a label class. That's what we did here, right? And the label class itself is in a separate folder. So inside of my scripts, I have two folders that we're using. One is core, where I have my app.js, and another one is objects, where I have my label.js. Notice that on the HTML side, we're using JS, but what we're really doing, because we're using TypeScript, we're using the TS file to build on. So we build everything in the TS file, and then it gets transpiled. How do I transpile in VS Code? Anybody remember? I need to transpile. I need to change things or compile from JavaScript to TypeScript. So I'm transpiling. That's what it's called. You can't do that unless you can make, there's two ways actually to do it. You can do it on the command line, right? Or you can do it with VS Code, which is easy. How do you do it? How do you make VS Code transpile? Anybody? Yes.
Yeah, have to have your TS config file, which tells it like which JavaScript.
Wonderful. So for TypeScript to work in general, you must have a TS config file, right? This tells the compiler how to transpile. What's the target language? We're targeting ECMAScript 5, which is the older version of JavaScript, right? Module type is COMM1073. Don't worry about this right now. It just supports the module, the way we're splitting files right now. That's the one way. There's also system.js and there's others. And then what's source maps? What's this? You said TypeScript TS config. What's source maps for? What do I need that for? Anybody? Source maps are there for debugging in the browser, right? So in the browser, when we go let's look at I want to inspect, look at console. For me to get information about where the error is on the TypeScript file, I need to have source maps. So source maps are actually an extra file that appears inside next to the JavaScript and TypeScript file, right here called map. And a lot of browsers need this these days to do things like debugging, right? And for compatibility reasons. Okay, so please make sure you have at least these options. These are the bare minimum options configured for tsconfig.json. Do you think I'm going to get you to configure this on your own next week? No. It's going to be in the file. So you'll have your tsconfig.json. Everything's going to be configured. All right, so you've told me what I need, but how do I transpile? I need to transpile. There's two ways. On the console, tsc, and then that's the command. And we got that command by installing, we did an npm install TypeScript at some point, right? Because our system must have TypeScript installed, all right? Okay, so we can do it on the command line. What's the other way to do it? We have to do it in VS Code. How do we transpile with VS Code? Because you need to know how to do this for next week. Do you know how to do it? Yes, Control-Shift-B on a PC, Command-Shift-B on a Mac, right? Now, the thing is, when I do this for the first time, if I didn't have my task configured, and I'm just going to get rid of this for a second to show you what this is. So I'm going to get rid of my tasks. So I have no tasks, right? My task manager. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-B for the first time. It's going to say, hey, man, right? No, the config is undefined. Let's do that again. And delete. So I'm moving that to trash. Let's try this again. Command-Shift-B. Config cannot read config of undefined. All right, that's cool. I like that. I like when it gives me errors that way because then I can always fix them, right? So the problem is I've kind of gotten rid of it, my my task manager, and it happens for the first time. Let me just go back to here for a second. Sometimes what I need to do with TypeScript, just letting you know, is close down VS Code and reopen it. When I do that, sometimes I just got to restore it back to what it was, which is totally cool. I have all the information. I just want to make sure that, sorry, I'm just trying to show you how to do that from scratch, but that's totally cool. Sorry, let's bring this back up, and we will drag and drop. There we go. Now, this could be something new in the latest version of VS Code as well. Sometimes that happens. Yeah, it totally is. So what I can do, thank God, because I have a trash, there's my task.json, right? And I want to put it back, but I can't, right? So luckily I have, this is why we use GitHub, right? GitHub is fantastic for this. I need a .vs code folder, right? So let's put that in. .vs code, yay. And inside my .vs code, I need a task.json file, which is what it is. So I go in there and go new file, tasks.json, there we go. And in my task.json file, what I need is these lines of code, which is right here. I'm just going to grab these lines of code here. And I'm going to explain them. This gets generated for the first time. Unfortunately, I can't do it here. But this gets generated for the first time for you when you press Command-Shift-B or Control-Shift-B. Now, hopefully that would accept this, and I'll be able to do Command-Shift-B now. Let's see if it still works. Yay, it did. So once I've got this file in place and I've built my task and I just pulled it down from the top when you do the first time, will I get you to do the tasks and the exam? No, it'll all be included in your file, right? So all you have to do is Command-Shift-B or Control-Shift-B if you're a PC user, and you're good to go. It should transpile. So please remember that. Transpiling from JavaScript to TypeScript is a must. If you don't do that, it'll stay as JavaScript, the way it was before, and then you're like, I don't know why, but there's no changes to my file. It looks exactly the same. I've added all this stuff, but nothing's happening. Nothing is happening because you haven't transpiled. You're modifying the TypeScript file, but the JavaScript file is behind, right? So now we've started the task runner going, which means that every time I change once you do Command-Shift-B or Control-Shift-B for the first time using a task like this, you never have to do it again. Well, as long as you're developing with VS Code in this session. The next session when you load it in, you have to press Command-Shift-B for the first time, and you'll have to do that on the exam, which I will remind you of when you get to there. I'm not going to tell them they're going to suffer. I want them not to know. That's not my thing, right? It's not. This exam is not about TypeScript. It's about using the tools, the API, to build something. Okay. All right, cool. So you've got this going on and everything else. It's ready to go. And what does this do? Inside of my scripts folder, inside of my core, inside my app.ts, we've got this file structure where we've kind of configured a couple things. We've kind of configured our canvas as an HTML element. We've noticed that our stage is a container for our CreateJS stage. It's going to house all of our animations and motion graphics and everything else. That's what the stage is. It's actually a display list container. Think about what I'm saying here. It's an array of objects that I can cycle through every frame, right, and update their positions on the canvas. That's what we're doing with the stage, right? I've added two different labels, right? One is the hello label, and the other one is the goodbye label, right? And quickly what I did was I added a click me button last time before we ended, right? I've also added, last week, I started to use something called UIDoc, right, as a way of documenting or adding some comments to the start of my functions. And remember how we did this? We're going to do it today again. We just use / and then all of a sudden it kind of configures this stuff for you. And there's a plugin for that in VS Code that I talked about, which is called Document This, right? So there's Document This. This is the plugin you need for VS Code. So please download this one. All right. And I got a bunch of, looks like I got a bunch of stuff that needs to be updated, which I'm not going to do this time, but you can see there's a bunch of updates. Angular 4, because Angular just updated Angular 4 recently, which is fantastic. So I'm not going to do these updates right now. Okay, so let's go down. So the documentation structure that you see here talks about the method. So we use the @ sign and to signify what the method is or the class or whatever, and what it returns, @ returns. So the method's called start, and what does it return? Void. And if I wanted to use TypeScript for this, I can just simply put :void for the type, right? And what this does, anything that when we use strict typing with TypeScript, all it does is give us good code hinting and tooling. So we know that if we're using something that we've built in the wrong way, TypeScript will notify us that it's incorrect, the way we've decided to use it. So we set up a structure, and if we use it wrong, then it's going to complain. It's going to say, hey, by the way, you told me it's supposed to be void, but now you're returning something. Something's wrong. What do you do? Why are you doing that? Do you mean should it be something else? Is that what you want? And so it gives us almost like debugging help before we actually do any debugging, right? That's why we use TypeScript a lot. TypeScript is a modern language that's being used in concert with front-end frameworks like AngularJS, React, as well as other frameworks. So it's something that's not going away anytime soon, so it's a good opportunity for you guys to learn it, and that's why I've kind of brought it into the last part of this course. Okay, so we have our start method. So there's two methods that I've really kind of created. Our start method, right? And I've also made an update method, right? By the way, there's a method to my madness because start and update, the same two method calls, we use it in other systems and other game engines like Unity. So if you learn how to do it here, the same structure can be followed almost exactly in Unity. Okay, so here's our start. And what we do here, we make a reference to the canvas element. That's what we did last time. And we also create a new stage object, right? It's of type CreateJS.stage. And we pass in the canvas element to the stage to say, hey, by the way, stage, I know you're an array. I know you're going to display all of our objects, but please use the canvas element as a hook. That's where you're going to put, that's where you're actually going to display everything on the canvas inside that little box. All right. We also use one static class called ticker. And the ticker class, which is part of CreateJS, all it does is sets the frame rate. And we also create an event on the ticker class, which actually what it does is it's almost like a beating drum. That's why I always like to think about it, right? It's going to keep beating 60 times every second. There's going to be a heartbeat, if you will, right? And every time that beat, fires, or the tick, it goes to the next tick. That's what they're called. We're going to call the update function. This update function, which I wrote down here, right? What it's going to do is it's going to trigger, right, or be called 60 times every second. This is our game loop. Inside the game loop, we can put anything that we want to change physically on the screen to appear on the screen is changing. We put it in here, right, inside the game loop. Okay, a lot of the fun happens over here. Notice that we're rotating our hello label -5 degrees every frame, and we're rotating our goodbye label +5 degrees every frame. So one's moving clockwise, the other one's moving counterclockwise in our example. That's what's happening here. All right, and our stage.update redraws or refreshes the stage, and that happens again 60 times per second. So pretty fast. Then, of course, at the top, notice inside of our start menu, we also call our method. We call our main method, and this is just another method. So after we've done doing all the setup, what we're really doing is in our main method, we're adding objects to the stage. And last week we talked about how we added a text object, but we want to do this more efficiently. So we created an object class, right? And we did that inside of the objects folder. We made another file called label.ts. That's what we did last week, right? And in our label.ts file, we have a class that we've exported inside of a module. We've kind of covered modules before, but I'm covering them again, right? So when we declare a module, in this case, we're calling it objects, it's a container. That's what we're doing, a closure, actually. It's just like an IFI, an immediately invoked function expression, right? And if you actually look at the JavaScript side, you can see that's exactly what it is. This is actually what it transpiles to, an IFI, right? That's what the module is, this part. And then what we're doing is we're declaring a class, but we're using the export keyword to expose the class. We're just exposing it. Otherwise, it would not be exposed. It would be hidden. We can make a module, but then if we don't expose anything, that means nothing's available outside of that module, right? And there's reasons for that sometimes. And then we're using our documentation. This is just our documentation to indicate what parameters the constructor is getting, right? And then we create a constructor. And the constructor is basically doing some of the heavy lifting for us. It's getting our text string, our font size, our font type, our font color, X and Y coordinates, and then also whether or not we want to center our label. That's what it's doing. Sometimes we want centered labels, sometimes we don't. Okay? And then that's all it really does. That's our label right now. Okay, so we've transpiled that. In order for us to use it, just like we did before, we have to include it inside the index.html right here. So it has to be referenced. Everything that is, all the libraries we use, and this is just a general learning for JavaScript, must be in your index.html file. Unless, and here's the proviso, unless you use a loader of some kind, another system, right? That loads all your modules folder. A module loader like Webpack, right? Like some other system JS loader or something else like that. You can do that, and it would be different than doing it like this. Again, finally, what we do is we also call our app.js. So notice we do all of our library calls and all of our custom files that we attach, and then we do our app.js, so that all of these libraries and our custom file is available to us, right, to use in our main module, which is our core module, right? That's what we're doing here. So if I go back to app.ts, you can see that I've added, excuse me, 2 labels and a button. But you can see the problem we're having with the button. This is the exact same problem. If I had more than one button here, oh my gosh, I would have to repeat all this stuff over and over again, right? Now, some people have run into some issues. And one of the issues is that what if I'm trying to measure the width of a button, an image, right? If you try and do this, sometimes what happens is, depending on the loading time of this, because we're referencing this image, we're creating a new image. This is just a bitmap. A bitmap, right? And when we think what a bitmap is, I want you to think about it as a grid, right? So think about it, the bitmap itself. It's some kind of image map. That's what I want you to think about it is, right? Each bit or pixel is actually somehow represented inside the file. So I have an example. I might have 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. That's my bitmap, right? And each bit is the pixel inside of a grid, right? And it has an X and Y coordinate. Okay, that's what a bitmap is. So really, when I create a bitmap, it's not really a button, right? All I'm doing is I'm making the bitmap, the image, clickable so it looks like a button, right? Now, it doesn't really do much right now, right? For example, one time when I actually run my click me button and I use the on method, which is part of CreateJS, on is like add event listener. And it's very similar to what we did with jQuery, right? Because we use jQuery for the on method, right? We said, so on click, here's our event handler. And that's what this is, right? This is the click button event handler, right? And actually, it's the event listener and the handler kind of built in. So this is the event listener. Here's the event listener, this part. And actually, the event handler is actually this part, event handler, which is actually written inline. It's an inline function right here. Okay, so I'm just reviewing what we did last week. Now let's run this thing and see how it works, because I think it's important to see, just to review how this works again, right? So again, I'm just going to go kind of open my files up here, and I'm going to go right to the bottom, and I'm going to open up in my terminal window. Here it is, and I'll close this one off. I don't need both. And I'm going to just use light-server for this, just like I normally do, right? Which is just a little NPM program that's going to do this. This is what we have so far. Not truly impressive, but it is a little file that happens. Notice I have to refresh that screen. That's what we were talking about before. The reason why is because I've refreshed. So in the first time it didn't come out, but when I refreshed, I'm good. If I click the button, you see how it changes. So it's changing from what it was before to what it is now. If I go back and refresh, goodbye and hello world, I click it again, bam, it changes to Sia and Haya, right? And that's because I clicked the button. But you know what the problem with the button that I have right now? There's a couple of problems. One is, it doesn't look like a button to me. It looks like a square, right? It doesn't give the user any feedback when I'm hovering over it. Wouldn't it be nice if I got some kind of visual feedback that it's actually a button, right? Like when I hover over it, changes opacity or something. And we can do that, of course. Right? We can do that. But it requires another event handler for this, right? And what would you think the event handler would be when I hover my mouse over a button, or when I hover my mouse out of the button? What would you think the event handler would be? How would I write the event handler in TypeScript? TypeScript, JavaScript at this point, the same. Okay, don't worry about that. So I want to get some ideas from this table, because this is review for next week. So I want to write an event handler. How would I do it here for my click button? So when I hover over, right, the button, then it does some special effect, right? How would I do that? How would I write the event handler, the event listener? I want to write it similar to what I'm doing here. How would I do it? Any idea? Start me out. Doesn't matter. Start me out. I'll start right here. What should I do first? What's the first thing I need to do? When I write any kind of event listener for an object, what's the first thing I need to do? Anybody else have any idea? Sorry? Sorry? The name of the event, the object. So the name first is click me button. So click me button. There we go. That's the first thing. And now, that's my button. Now I want to add an event listener. I could use add event listener, right? But the sexy way to do it these days is .on. right? That's the new way of doing it, right? And now what's the event? What do you think the event is going to be for the event listener? What do you think the event is that I'm going to use? Yes? Hover might be okay, but there's actually a nicer one I like. What's the other one? No, click is actually the click event, right? I don't want to do a click event again. Yes? Mouse over. That's the one, right? Thank you for that. So mouse over, right? And now notice where I'm at. It tells me good code hinting from TypeScript is telling me, hey, I got my type. Now I need the listener callback, right? So what's the listener callback? It's going to be right here. What is it? It's a function. It's an anonymous function, right? So I can write a function just like I did it before. And inside my function, when I mouse over, I want something to happen. And I want my button, the click me button itself, right, to change opacity, right? Now, the great thing about mouse events, because these are mouse events, click and mouse over, is CreateJS has a function for this. It's actually called, we can call it event, which is of type CreateJS mouse event. Okay? We can do the same thing over here if we want. Event CreateJS mouse event. Okay, so why am I needing that? Because I can reference the event object right in here. For example, I can reference event.target, right? Or event.current target. Here we go. Event.current target. I could do that, right? Now, in this case, I don't need to do that, right? I know what the event target is, which is my click me button. My click me button dot opacity or transparency or alpha is the other way to say it, right? Alpha transparency, right? And it goes from, it's normalized, okay? So when I say normalized, if you hear about normalized in mathematics, it means from what, two numbers? From 0 to 1. Normalized values go from 0 to 1, okay? So they're not from like, 1 to 100%, from 0 to 1. It's a floating point number, right? That goes from 0.00000, all the way to 1 with all the infinite combinations between. So what I could do is I can say something like my alpha would be when I hover over, right, is 0.7. So it's 70%, which means my alpha transparency, I can see it. That's how opaque it is, if you will. Opacity is a better word for this, for alpha, what this is, right, is 0.7. Okay, but we're not going to see a change. And I'll tell you right now, even if this was to work and I mouse over, you won't see anything. First of all, the reason why you won't see anything is because we're trying to do something with a bitmap. And CreateJS have safeguards because whenever we try and do some kind of mouse over or mouse events, right, it takes up a lot of overhead in terms of calculations for CreateJS to work. And because we're doing something visual, right, it's turned off by default. We have to turn something on, right, in order for us to enable mouse events, right? So on my start method, in order for me to enable the mouse events, I'm going to go to my start, and I'm going to start typing stage. And if I start typing mouse, right, you can see that enable mouse over is what I want. Enable mouse over, right? Now it is a method, and I want to put in there a frequency of how often do I want to check the event, all right? I want to put no higher than 20 frames per second. That's what I want to change it to. So this enables our mouse over and mouse out events. If you don't turn this on, mouse over and mouse out will be disabled. You will never be able to see the effects of this change. Okay, so just to enable that little functionality there. Okay, cool. That's a good way of testing. So all we care about is when we hover over, right? That's what this mouse over does. But we also want to create the sister function, which is mouse out, right? We want to use mouse out. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing. So I'm going to use a semicolon here. And I'm going to copy this thing and go over here and paste it. And instead of mouse over, I'm going to use mouse out, right? And when we're out, we're going to change this back to 1.0. So this is 70% opaque, right? And this is 100% opaque, so fully opaque, right? So this is solid, if you will. You can also see this as 30% transparent, right? Same thing. Opacity, transparency, alpha transparency, it's the same thing. I just want to point this out, what this value is. That's what this thing does. All right. Cool. Let's test it. See if it works. Right. That's the first thing. I mean, you know, we played around a little bit, but oh man, what the heck? I got an error. Right. It's not seeming to work. This doesn't like me. Right. And if I go back, you can see that I got an error because I'm not getting anything on the screen anymore. Let's see what the problem is. So I'm going to inspect. I'm going to go to my console. And it says uncut type error, cannot read property on of undefined. Okay, I like that. Doesn't know what on is, right? And here we have two instances, 65 and 72. Notice that it's in the JS file, right? That it's talking about. So if I actually click on this, it's looking at my app.js. And 65 and 72, you see that there's a click me button dot on. I did it over here, right? But when I do it over here, it doesn't know what the heck I'm doing. What's the problem? Anybody have an idea? I know exactly what the problem is. But do you guys know what the problem is? I mean, it did it, but why isn't this complaining? It should be complaining, no? Yeah, it's outside of this part. This part is it. This is actually the main method's right here. Starts from here and goes to here. And I've accidentally put it outside of the main method by putting it down here. This is in the global module space, right? So I'm going to kind of cut it out of here and just put it over here, right? And if you want to, you can also use Command A or Control A, and then to highlight everything. And then if I want to format my document, I could do that. I can reformat everything so it rebalances everything so it looks nice. Now when I save, it transpiles, and if I go back to my page, I'm good to go, right? Except for the button, and we'll talk about why that does that in a bit. Actually, someone brought it up already, right? Because the method, the loading itself. Now look what happens. If I hover over, I should get this effect, right? So now it looks more like a button. Not quite exactly what I want, but more like a button. What else could you do here with the mouse out and mouse over events? What could you do instead of hovering and changing opacity? What's another option? It's expensive, but you could do it. What could you do? Yes? You could add a shadow, but what's even more expensive than adding some kind of special shadow effect? I'm hovering over my mouse, and I'm hovering out of my mouse. What could I do? What's the other really expensive thing I could do? Right? I could do what? The size? Okay, we can do that. It's not really that expensive. But I like your thinking. So let's say when I hover my mouse over, I go 70% opaque, and I want to change my my scale, right? So I want to click me button. And if I look at all the things that I can do, right? So I want to change my scale, and there's two scales. There's scale X and scale Y, right? So I have to change both of them. I can change them equally or differently. So if I put scale X, and we can make that, let's say, we'll make it slightly bigger, 1.2. Again, it's normalized, right? And click me button. Oh. Click me button. Click me, man. Click me. And then here's scale Y is equal to 1.2. So this is 20% bigger. And then, of course, when we hover out, we'll go back to making it 20% small, or back to 100% again, right? We can go back to 1.0, right? Which is 100%. So this is 120% of scale, so 1.2 times bigger. And this is 100% of scale, which is normal size, right? So scale X and scale Y does. Okay, that's cool. I like that. I like that thinking, right? So if I hover over now, it gets bigger, right? And I hover out, it gets back to smaller. So not only does it give me transparency, but it also changes the size, right? Well, what's really expensive? What can I do that's really expensive here? There's something I can do that some people do because they want to really have a nice effect. What other thing can I do here? Anybody have an idea? I could swap out this image, right? I could swap an image out and make it so it looks different completely, right? Load another image file altogether and swap it out so that I have a special effect. Maybe the image is going to actually change when I hover over or hover out. That's expensive. Why is it expensive? Because I'm loading every single time, and I don't want to do that. In fact, I never want to load my images. I only want to do them once. I want to preload everything. Wait a minute, preload. We have a preload method that we can use, right? That's built into CreateJS. So instead of us doing our path, our file path all the time, we can preload all of our images. Now we wouldn't do it here, right? We would preload our images somewhere else, right? In another file altogether, preload. And think about preloading as using Ajax. That's what we're using, Ajax, to load up our files ahead of time as big blobs. That's what they're going to be, right? They're blobs of data, and I'm preloading them. Why would I want to do that, right? Because although my load time for my page might be a little slower, right? Because I'm preloading all my images, I never have to do file access again, right? Which means I can swap images in and out because I already have them. All I'm doing is pointing to where they are, right? That's all I need to do here, right? Which is a much more efficient way of doing things. And for games especially, oh my gosh, you want to preload everything. You don't ever want to load things on the fly. That's really slow, and it really slows things down in general. Okay, cool. So we've talked about some concepts, and I've done this button, but wow, imagine if I had to do another button. Whew, man, I'd have to do this again and again and again for all my buttons. So this lends itself to the opportunity for us to create a button class. This is, again, good practice for you. Well, you have to create some kind of class next week. Maybe. I mean, I got to be honest. There's got to be something you got to do, right, for your exam, right? So probably there's going to be something to do with classes, or maybe some kind of module you have to make or something. Who knows? Maybe there'll even be a bonus for that. All right, so if I go to scripts, I need to put my button class somewhere because I don't want to do all this work every single time I make a button. Holy crap, it'd be crazy, man. I would go nuts, right? So that's probably one of the issues. I don't want to do this. So just like I did with my label class, I need to create a new file. So right-click on my object, new file, and I'm going to call this the button.ts file. Notice I'm going ts, not js, because I want to transpile. And as soon as I put it in here and put ts, because my task manager here in VS Code is watching, it automatically creates my JS file and my JS map file. Does it all, even though they're empty. It just creates them for me, right? Okay, so how do I start off? How do I start off my module? What do I do? How do I start off my module? Come on. You're going to do this next week, so you better know, right? So how would I start off my module? Well, it's inside my module. I want to make my module first. So how do I do that? What's the first thing I need to put in? What's the keyword that I need to use? Module, right? So I use module. Right, I need to name my module. I'm going to name it the exact same name as last time, objects, right? And I'm going to put it inside these curly braces. Yay, module, right? This is step one. We make our module and put our class in our module, and we export the class, right? So now we're going to, just like you said, we're going to export the class, right? Which we're going to call button with a capital B, because we want to make all of our classes capitalized. Yes? Well, think about what I'm doing. I'm actually making an objects class, an objects module, but I'm breaking the module up into different files, right? So all I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, take this new class, this button class, and add it into the objects module. Keep on adding, keep on adding, keep on adding. And I can keep on adding as many modules as I want that are all part of the objects module, right? I don't have to. I can make this something else. I can call this whatever I want, but I'm just making it the same. So I can just say objects.label, objects.button, objects.whatever, yeah. The module keyword creates the container space. The object is the name of the container, right? That's what it is, right? And remember what a module does is it creates an IFI on the back end, right? So I want to export my class button, but I also want to extend, because we're going to use inheritance to extend the functionality that comes with CreateJS bitmap, right? So here's CreateJS bitmap. So we want to use that functionality. So we're saying, hey, guess what? We want to make a new type of bitmap, but it's called button, right? The button class. And what I want to do here is I want to create a constructor. We use the word constructor. And because I'm making a new button, I need to call the super constructor, and it takes an image or URL string, right? So that's what I need. I need kind of an image string. That's what I need here in my constructor, which is going to be of type string. Okay, that's one of the things I definitely need, right? So here's my super constructor. I'm passing in the image string. Now this is where we get into trouble with checking how large an image is, because, like I said, has the image at this point been created? No. Until I actually create my object, it hasn't created the image, so therefore I can't measure it, which is a problem because I haven't preloaded it, right? My image does not exist. And because it doesn't exist, I can't preload it. I can't test for how big the actual image is, right? Which is slightly different than what we've done before. Okay, so this is cool, my image string. I want to pass my image string in there. But if all I did was do the exact same thing as the bitmap class, then I don't need a class. So I want to do a little bit extra. Let's take a look at some examples of what I can do, right? I'm just going to open up another little tab here, and I'm going to port over the app.ts to see what we've done over here. I'm going to close this up to give us a little bit more real estate. And I'm going to kind of go over here on the right and take a look at this click me button. Okay, so here's what my click me button would look like. It needs a path, right? So this is the path string that I'm going to put into it. And then I'm doing this get bounds, regx and regY stuff, right? So that means I want to test to see if it's centered, right? So I can do the same thing. Is centered, right? Which is a Boolean, right? That's it. So I can ask for that as well. So one part is I'm asking for the image string, which is this part, and I'm asking for is it centered or not? Yes or no? Cool. I also need to know my x and y coordinates, right? So I want to get that information. So x, which is a number, and y, which is a number, right? I want all those things in my constructor. Just to make it so that you can see the constructor, I'm going to put them on separate lines, not because you need to do this by any means, all right? So I'm just going to kind of do one of these just so you can see what I'm doing. Here's my x and y coordinates, right? This is my constructor. This is what I'm listening for when I create my class, right? Cool. I got all these things, x and y. I'm adding then I add it to the object. But wouldn't it be nice if I can do some of this stuff? My click me button dot on mouse over and mouse out. That's never going to change, right? If I do this for all my buttons, right? Wouldn't it be nice? This will change. I can't do this because my click will be different for every button. My button will do something different every single time. Otherwise, why even have more buttons? Just one button will do everything, right? But if I want every button to do this effect, mouse over and mouse out, that is something that I can add into my class, that I can replicate. So I don't have to do this extra code all the time, right? Cool. So that means I need a method. So first of all, let us start by using my documentation. So I'm going to go / and then 2 stars, which automatically creates everything with document this. Again, please download and install the document this module or plugin for VS Code. It'll do this for you automatically, right? Okay, so that's one thing. I need that. Whoa, you're going to say, wait a minute, didn't you just tell me that you need the width and the height of the button? I need to do that because I can't calculate it. I cannot, right? If I try and calculate the width of the button, it doesn't know because I'm just in the process of creating the button, I'm trying to calculate the width of the button. I don't have that information, right? So let me undo that. Maybe what I want to do before I do my comments is actually add in width and height as well. So width, height, x, and y. I need those coordinates. So width, which is a number, right? And height, which is also a number. Now, if I want my image string is centered, width and height to be actual properties of my button class, there's 2 things I can do, right? I can make them public or I can make them private. If I make them private, then they're variables that are only available inside my class. If I make them public, then I expose the variables outside of the class. And sometimes I need to do that. In this case, I want to make my image string private. I want to have this variable in there. My is centered. If it's centered or not, I want to make it private. Yes. There's no default. There wouldn't be anything. They would just be local. Now I'm making them actual properties. When I do the private or public keywords inside the constructor, in TypeScript only. This doesn't work for any other language, just TypeScript. It's a shortcut. It actually adds it in as a property into the class itself. All right. So if I go to width and height, I want those to be private as well, right? Because I probably don't need them outside. So I'm using underscore to denote private in this case. I'll put this underneath. Okay. I'm using underscore because underscore is a convention that we use to tell people that my variable is private. So when they see the variable, even if they don't see the declaration, they can look at the variable and go, hey, that's probably private because it's got an underscore in front of it, right? Seriously, that's what we do. It's pretty much a standard everywhere. Some people don't like it, all right? You might ask some people, that, depending on the coding house, they might say, no, we don't do that. We don't do underscore. That's not a best practice, right? But you know, for a lot of us, we like to do this because it's kind of a visual representation of private right away. We know just that underscore tells us it's private, okay? So therefore, now that I've got these things, these are all the things I need to make my button. I can't make my button without asking for all of these parameters, right? Now up here, now I can do my little documentation. And now it'll do everything updated with all the underscores and everything else. Notice what it does. It kind of detects what it is, a string, a Boolean, a number. It tells, you know, when you create this object, it tells kind of the people who construct this or create the object what this is. Okay. I could also split this off. I want to really do good commenting. I can also split this off and kind of do something like this, where I can kind of do something, you know, some kind of separator, where I can say constructors, because maybe I want to have more than one constructor. You know, nothing too fancy, something like that. Some people don't like that as well. They're like, no, never do that. Never put any kind of decorations inside of your comments. That's bad. Really depends. And if I had any private properties here that I don't declare inside my constructor, I can put them up here. Okay. For now, we're not going to do that. Up here in my objects, underneath my objects, I could also do documentation from my class. So I can go ... and I can see that it'll give me my class. Right? It does it automatically. I don't have to write this stuff, right? But it asks me for some kind of description in the top, the header, which I can put in. Something like this, the button class, you know, button class creates an instance of the CreateJS bitmap class. Or maybe extends, instead of creates an instance, extends the CreateJS bitmap class, right, as an example. That's what we want to say it does. But it also gives us additional things, right? It gives us the ability to do other things. And I'm not going to put it in here, but you can put as much detail here as you want, right? Okay, cool. So that's the button. Now it's a space. Here's my constructor. Yes? No, because X and Y is a properties that already exist in bitmap, right? My bitmap class here, like this, that we're inheriting from, it already has X and Y, right? Because if you notice over here, we already used X and Y when we created our button. I didn't have to create a button class to use X and Y because X and Y, regX and regY, text values, alpha, scale, all that stuff is part of the bitmap class, right? So I'm inheriting them. When I extend you know, a class, I'm actually inheriting all the properties and methods that already exist in that class into my new class. I'm kind of saying, hey, I want to make it bigger. I like your bitmap, but I want to add some functionality to it, right? So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, cool. So here's my constructor as an example, right? And what I want to do here is I want to add in a couple of methods. So we're going to make these methods private. So again, I'll kind of put something like this, where I kind of put some kind of decoration and say private methods. When you're documenting an API, right, or something like that, you want to, and that's what I'm making here. I'm making an API, button and label, two pieces of code that you guys can reuse. If I was going to give you this code tomorrow and you looked at my documentation, you would look at it and go, okay, I understand what I can do here. Right, here's my private methods. Private methods are only available inside my class, and I want to do this kind of stuff, right? So I want to say this dot on, click on mouse over, sorry, these two pieces on mouse over, this dot on mouse out, and I want to do this kind of stuff, right? But I can't say click me button now, right? Because it won't be just for the click me button. It'll be for all buttons that I make, right? So I got to use the other methodology, which is the event.target, okay? But actually, I don't even have to do. I don't even have to go that far. Let's show you. So I'm going to say private. There's going to be two methods. One of them is going to be called the mouse over. So we'll call it the mouse over event, right? And the mouse over event, right? That's what this thing is, right? Is going to be the event listener that I'm going to create, right? And this is actually going to be this is going to be the actual handler. So there's these two handlers. So I'm going to make the mouse over event, right? So I'm going to make the scaffold for it right now. And I'm also going to make something called a mouse out event. There we go, mouse over and mouse out. All right, cool. And notice that it says, I'm getting this error. It says TS expected this because I need these things, right? I need parentheses. Okay, cool. Now inside my constructor, I want to, when the constructor fires, when it triggers, I want to add or bind those events, right? But I want to indicate that the mouse over and mouse out methods are going to be the handlers for each of these events. Okay? So this is something different. So here in my constructor, I'm going to bind the mouse over and mouse out events. I don't have that. But how do you do that? This dot on, right? And then we'll say mouse over, just like we did over here. Notice how it's almost exactly the same as this, except we're using the this keyword, which denotes this bitmap. This bitmap on mouse over, right? We're saying call a function. Which function is going to be? This dot underscore mouse over. That function we just made. And this on mouse out, we're going to call the this dot underscore mouse out. Those are the two events we're calling. So we're binding those two event handlers. Yes.
I was a little confused in JavaScript generally. Like we're calling a method, and we don't need parentheses every time.
We're not calling a method. We're referencing a method. We're not calling a method here, just like we're not calling a method here, right? What we're doing here is we're referencing. We're saying, hey, give me the reference or point me to where what function you want to use to do something. What's going to happen after I hear the event? I'm listening for the event. What's the event? It's a mouse over event. Okay, fine. I heard it. I heard the event. Now what do I want to do? Well, tell me what to do. This tells you what to do, right? So you can point to the callback that's being triggered when the event fires. All right. So example in this case, I have my mouse out, my mouse over event. It needs to go somewhere. It needs to do something. And this callback function right here is we're just calling it by reference. So we're just pointing to it. That's all we're doing here. So saying call this mouse over event. It's right here, right? That's why we're not using the round brackets. Round brackets will actually call the method, which is not what we want. Right? Does that make sense? Calling the method is different. You won't get a reference to it. It'll actually call it inline, which is not what I want here. I just want to say, hey, which method do you want me to do? Do you want me to call when I get that? If I put the parentheses in place, I call it immediately. I don't want to call it immediately. I want to call it when I hear the event happen, when it triggers, right? Okay, so what is the event? It's the mouse over, or the handler is the mouse over and the mouse out handler, these two handlers. Now they're empty, right? But we're going to put some of this stuff in there. We know that mouse over has this event, which is of type CreateJS mouse event, right? We're going to use that. And the same thing goes with this mouse out. I'm just going to actually copy this just to save us some time. All right, cool. And now I want to do all this stuff, right? I want to do the exact same thing. So I can do the same thing. If I copy this for a second, hear me out before you type. And if I show you, right, if I copy this, well, there is no click me button. It's going to give me an error, right? Because click me button only exists in the other file. However, I can reference this object. So I can say this alpha, right, which is referring to the object itself. Okay? This scale, right, this alpha. And if I do that, then I can do the same thing over here, right? So I copy all this, put it in here, and change the reference to the button to this, which is referencing the image itself. I guess I've just created a class. Am I done? Am I done? I can just use the class right now? This is step 1, remember? What's step 2? Right? Well, yeah, but so these are my objects. I can also, by the way, I can also comment these things a little nicer. So I can go down here and go // right? Which is, this is the mouse over event handler, right? Or I can say the mouse over event handler, not this is. Right, and then over here, the mouse out event handler, right? There we go. Okay, so I'm just commenting. This is a quick way of commenting your code. I'm showing you how to do this to get marks for your final assignment as well, right? So they look identical. They look almost identical. If I want to show you the code, it's just like this, just like we did with our other stuff. There's no difference here. But this is only step 1. Step 2, you must bind this script to our index.html file. If you don't add it in, it will never work, ever, because that script is never, it hasn't been added into the cache, the browser cache. Remember how it works. Anything I put into my browser, anything that I want accessible in my browser, if I go to my index.html, must be referenced here, because at line 19, in this example, I'm actually including the entire Easel.js library right here. I'm actually expanding it. I'm going, it's like I'm blowing up a balloon, and I'm putting the whole library right here. And I'm doing that in line 20, in line 21, in line 22. But there's nothing here so far that indicates I want to use my button, so I have to add a reference to it. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say script source, and I'm going to add in my button objects. We know it's called button, and we can't use TS. We got to use JS because it doesn't understand Java TypeScript in the browser yet. Okay. All right, cool. So label button app. That means now we've added it into the flow. Right, we can also check that it's been transpiled, right? By going to objects, we have 2. We have objects button and objects label, right? Now that I have these 2 files and I've referenced them in my index.html, then I can go ahead inside of my scripts core app.ts file, this one, and now I can use them. Now, how do I use it? Up in the top, I've declared some variables, right? And I made this click me button, but I called it a bitmap. Is it a bitmap anymore? I'm not going to use a bitmap anymore. I want to use my own custom button class, right? So the way I can do that is objects.button. It actually appears now, right? Okay, but if this is the case, man, I'm going to have some errors. Look, there's an error over here. Here's my error. I'm saying, hey, click me button, make a new one call, but it's type bitmap. That's incorrect, right? This will be objects.button now, because that's the new object I have, but it's still wrong, right? Because I'm missing a bunch of parameters, right? I need, is it centered or not? Yes. Oh, I got to fix that. That's a problem, right? I also need the width and the height. I don't know the width and the height of my button. I don't know. How do I figure that out? Well, you got to go to your operating system for that, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I know my button is under assets, images, click me button, right? And I can't get, luckily now it gives me a little preview, but one thing it doesn't do, it doesn't really tell me the width and the height by default here, right? If I want to see this in the Finder or in your operating system in Explorer, click this, it'll take you to the button, and if you hover over sometimes with Windows, it'll tell you the width and the height right away. Or in Mac, you can actually go get info, and you can see the width and the height. You can actually, it'll open it up and tell you a lot of times in here the width and the height of your button. Failing that, if it doesn't, in this case for me, it does not, although it should. You can open it up in your favorite image manipulation program, and you do this ahead of time. Let's say, for example, in Fireworks or Photoshop or GIMP or Krita or whatever your favorite image manipulation program is. I don't know, Illustrator, I can keep going, whatever, right? And in here, you can see that if I click on my button, I have some preferences for my button. Here it is right here. Make this a little bigger and pull this up here. You can see that my button itself is 150 by 40. That's the size, 150 width and 40 heights, right? That's a pain, eh? If I do that every single time, maybe there's another way. Preload, right? And you don't have to do that anymore. But let's just say 150 by 40. Let's go back to that. I know that's my size, 150 by 40. Man, how do I remember that? What if my buttons are all 150 by 40? Do I have to hard code 150 by 40? That's a real pain in the ass, right? Well, let's make this work, and then we want to fix it after, because that's bad. It's bad coding, right? All right, so let's go back into my app.ts. And in here where I'm listening for my width and my height. Width is 150, height is 40, X and Y. Well, look, my X and Y is 125 by 200. That's where I want it, and I'm good, right? I've created I've satisfied the conditions for my constructor. There we go. So just to show you what it looks like this, right? Hey, do I need all this now? No, I won't need it, but I need to fix this part, regX and regY, right? Because I don't really do anything with that in my button class. Let's fix my button class first. Forgot to do that. So inside my constructor, right, which is up here, not only do I have to do this, mouse over and mouse out, but maybe before that, what I want to do is check to see if it's centered. So if is centered, right? Oops. If underscore is centered, if that's true, then what I want to say is this.regx is equal to this.width, this.underscore width, sorry, right? Times 0.5, or half the width. And this regY is equal to this.underscore width, height, sorry, times 0.5. So half the width and half the height. I'm sending my anchor point, the pivot, if you will, for my entire thing, right? So basically, this is check to see if the user requires the button to be centered, right? So the buttons, not the button itself, but the button's pivot centered. Anchor point. Yes.
But if the user doesn't want it to be centered,
Then it won't be, because I'm checking here, and if this is false, then it won't do these things. It'll just leave it at 0, 0, top left corner by default, right? Okay, cool. So so that fixes that problem. Let's go back to this. So I don't need to do any of this anymore, right? Because all this is handled in my class, right? And if I don't need to do that, I need to do this. This part here, I'm adding it to the stage. That I need to do, right? And I need to do this part. That part I need. But this part, all this code, I've already done this code, right? All this code is inside my class. I can get rid of this too. Now it's more manageable, right? And I can make many more buttons, right? And all I have to worry about is the click handler, right? That's because the click is going to be different for every button, right? You can't make the click handler much easier than this. All right, let's test to see if this works, because nice talking, Tom, but who knows if this even works, right? So save, it transpiled. I go back to my code. Oops. Go back to my code here and refresh. Oh man, what the heck? What happened up here? Well, what did I miss in my class? I missed something else in my class, right? Well, no, I did that, but I got my X and Y coordinates, but I never assigned them. So in my class, I need to do something like this. I need to say, so before I do my centering, right? Actually, sorry. First I center, then I actually position. So set the position of the button. Now this has to be done after, because if the pivot is in the center, it's going to affect how it appears on the screen, right? By default, the position is 0, 0, and that's why I went to the corner, right? I don't want that. I want to accept my position. So I'm going to say something like this: this dot x is equal to x, and this dot y is equal to y, because I'm getting x and y right here. Those are local variables, and x and y, this dot x and this dot y, are actually properties of the CreateJS.bitmap class, right? So I want to set those. If I go back, you can see now that it's set up. So does the hover trick, which means my class is triggering, right? And I can make as many buttons now as I want, right? So the workflow we talked about before we take a break. We talked about first we create something that works, and then we start thinking about refactoring. I want to think about refactoring my JavaScript or my TypeScript. I'm using JavaScript actually mostly, right? The only thing that I'm doing a little differently with TypeScript that's helping us is this whole module piece, right? This whole module piece is helping me, right? Because what it's actually doing in the background, this isn't what it really looks like in JavaScript. It looks like googly, like crazy, right? A lot of work that I would do, right? Remember though, we talked about this before, just because it tastes sweet doesn't mean it's good for you, right? Well, in this case, it's not bad. Let me take a look at what it does for us. So if I look at this as my button.ts, if I actually look at my button.js, what it compiles to, it looks like this, right? Which is crazy, but some of this is almost the same, right? Some of this is almost the same. But this is what it actually does. When I create private variables, I actually do this. This dot underscore image string is equal to image string. This dot underscore is centered is centered, and so on. That's what I'm actually doing. So this is what it looks like on the back end, right? The rest is all the same, right? But I'm using prototype. Remember that prototype keyword? Because I'm building a class with JavaScript here on the back end, right? With the prototype keywords, as opposed to that classical inheritance method, where I'm actually not using prototypal inheritance. I'm using classical, or trying to mimic classical inheritance with using TypeScript. Okay, so that's what this thing is. So things to learn from this one is, and the great use of TypeScript, which I'm breaking my files over modules, different modules, number one, right? By the way, this is the most advanced piece that you're going to get here in this class. I'm not going to go more advanced than this. Can I go more advanced than this? Absolutely. The things you can do with TypeScript are amazing. There's a bunch of functionality. I do encourage you to read the API documentation, right, for TypeScript. Well, we do more with CreateJS. Well, the one thing we can do more with CreateJS is do that preloading, which I'll do after the break. Let's take a short break, 10 minutes, and when we come back, we'll preload the heck out of the button, right, and see what happens.